So the motion set, it's presented, again, she's like this 14-foot tall doll. And here's a bizarre fun fact. This was not something that was actually created for the show.
Oh, it wasn't?
She existed previously, and they found her and they brought her to the set to be this thing, but she was not actually created for the show. And they
saw it and they were like, that big creepy doll is perfect for this script.
Yes, because she's big and she's creepy and she's got these big eyes and
3, 2, 1, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in the DeLorean. Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly? The podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly?
Welcome, Tamara and friends. Am I in your house or you're in my house today? Which is
Hey everyone, it's good to see you. And Hakeem, I'm not sure when this episode is dropping, but you have some good news to share, don't you? A new little position.
Yes, I know. How you gonna put me
position.
on blast like that? I'm despite my sense of humor, I'm actually humble and I don't like to,
I'm going to have you toot your own horn. Tell us about your new job.
Yeah, so I am a new CEO. I am the CEO of America's longest standing, oldest national astronomy organization called the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. And they have done amazing things over the years. Astronomy has changed a lot since 1888. So I am the leadership for the new generation. So we're about to inspire and educate the world.
Very, very cool. Well, they are lucky to have you, and that is very awesome news.
Let's talk about something a bit more morbid, right? This is all positive and lovely. Let's get into the entertainment that the humans really enjoy.
I see you stretching out those tentacles, which is a little hint of what we're going to be talking about today. We are going to be talking about the Netflix series Squid Game.
Yes. It was a huge hit. I didn't make it that deep into it, but apparently world over, people loved it. It was a bit morbid for me. So
yeah, it's a bit desperate for me, and we'll certainly talk about that a little bit later. But specifically, we're going to be talking about the conceit in the show Young-hee, which is featured in the very first episode. So quick description for folks who may not have seen Squid Game. We're going to try, because this is a more recent series, we're going to try and stay away from too many spoilers. We're really just going to be talking about the first episode. But the setup for the show is it's a game where participants, there's 456 of them, are all in some kind of really enormous debt. And as the gameplay goes on, there's a big piggy bank that fills with cash, and ostensibly the competitor who is left standing at the very end will get that cash. However, dire circumstances occur along the game for that cash to accumulate.
That's an understatement.
Yeah. Basically, if you don't win your round, you're killed. So most people know that. That's not a big spoiler. There are other spoilers. We're going to stay away from those.
Absolutely. And in this particular episode, they get to play a game that many of us played as children, red light, green light, right? With a bit of a, morbid twist. And that is that instead of being out of the game, you're out of the game. You're out of the game of life. It's a wrap.
So most people know the game Red Light, Green Light. It's a game that was played, here in America by most school kids. It's also apparently played in South Korea. It's a very common game. And so you've got the person who's usually deemed it, who stands at the far end and counts down red light, green light, 1, 2, 3, and you run until they turn around. And you have to freeze when they turn around. And if they catch you, then you're out. And in this case, it is a huge animatronic doll named Young-hee, and it's gigantic. It stands at the very end of a long playing field, And it's really spooky. She's tall. She's not
There we go.
human. She's
As you're throwing out these adjectives, I'm waiting for the creepy, spooky. Yeah, you don't want to play red light, green light with Young-hee.
no. And Young-hee has motion sensors in her eyes. That's made clear in the show.
Yeah.
And so, it's a lot of times we humans might not see some small movements from far away, but Young-hee doesn't miss a thing.
No, Young-hee does not miss a thing. No, and Young-hee has a set of assistants who are, the deliverers of her justice, and they don't miss either. So once Young-hee identifies you as a mover, the repercussions are instantaneous and final.
That's right. And if all of this sounds a little morbid for you, well, that apparently is part of the charm of the series, because this show was nominated for numerous Emmy Awards, and it actually won 6 of them. So, it's very popular amongst folks who appreciate creepiness.
You know what, though? There's a less creepy version of what Young-hee does. Before we get into the science, just looking at the coincidence of it all, I received a meme, or whatever you call these little videos on the internet, on my social media, just yesterday. Allegedly a security device in South Africa. Now, I once upon a time was a professor in South Africa at the University of Cape Town. Okay. And at the time, there were a spate of carjackings. So one of the self-defense technologies that someone developed were these gas canisters that were under each side of your car. So if someone approached the side of your car, you could press a button and flames would shoot out. Okay. So that was deemed
that sounds
illegal.
like Batman's car.
Right. Yeah. You can't, they're like, that does not stand up to, what is that? The after World War II, they passed all these laws about warfare and how to do it more humanely. Right. And so, that is not sufficiently humane for the streets of Johannesburg. So now they have these non-lethal spheres, think of it like paintballs. That's what it looks like. And it sits on a pole and it has a motion sensor. And so if someone enters your property and, they shouldn't be there, it locates them and hits them with the paintballs, right, to drive them off. So you could put it in your,
that Ring is going to be picking up on that and adding that as a feature. And then they're going to upcharge you for whether you want people to be hit with like a fuchsia paintball or a green paintball.
Skunk smell paintball.
Ooh.
Right?
Oh, God.
The smell of thieves or the smell of trespassers.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So the science that we're going to talk about today is about Young-hee's detection and death delivery system. How can you detect this motion for these individuals? Because how many people enter the game, right? It's dozens.
It's
right?
456.
456. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people. So all these people out running in this field, attempting to make it to the end. How does Young-hee monitor each person individually and then deliver justice?
That's the question that I have.
Yeah. When I thought about this one, it's hard, because our producers, they put in a lot of work to stump us. They're like, there's no way. This technology seems so advanced. It could never fly. Let's see if Hakeem and Tamara can figure this out. This one is so easy.
Huh. Okay.
I could make this tomorrow. All right. Call up my engineering dream team and we could have us a Young-hee. It's very similar to what the police radars do. And here's what I mean by that. The big problem with Young-hee's technology is the specificity given the data set of these 400 and some odd individuals. So I'm going to combine airport technology and traffic monitoring technology here. So what do I mean by that? In airports, they use facial recognition technologies to follow you as you go through the airport, right? And build up this big data set of people as they go, right? And so you get all these tracks, which is now you can distinguish the ones are doing what they should be doing versus those that are not. Well, in this case, all of the contestants go into this big room first. Okay. And I think it's in that room that if I were going to implement something like this, that I would get a facial scan of each individual. Once you have recognition, a signature of each individual, now you need a way of tracking each individual on that field individually. And that's where police scanning technology comes in, the radar gun. Because that's what they do. They scan different automobiles, targets simultaneously, and they even pick out which one is the one that's speeding, right? So there's some software on the back end. So what is this technology that allows you to do that? Well, these sensing technologies typically rely on sending out a microwave beam that's somewhat narrow, but it's not a continuous beam. It's a pulse, okay? So every individual can be given their own pulse frequency.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So now to measure motion, what you're looking at is a Doppler signal for forwards or backwards motion. So Young-hee, how sensitive is she? Is she see if you move your hand, any motion at all, right? That's more like the infrared sensors, or there's a lot of different. When you think about sensor technologies, in electronics, they go under a single umbrella name, and we call that transducers. Whether it's a microphone that takes a audible signal, right, which is really a pressure wave in air and converts that into an electric signal, or something that, for example, I want to know if my steak is ready. So I'm going to stick a probe into it and I turn the temperature signal into an electrical signal, right? So your microphone and your speaker are both transducers. They take one type of signal and translate it into another. So typically, for the stuff that we do, we want to take signals that are around us and turn them into electrical signals that our systems can now read out, right? So you need some sort of transducer technology that could see motion. Like Doppler is toward and away from you. How do you do motion that is not toward and away from you, but yet you know it's motion? All right. So I don't know in this case. I didn't really study that, but in my mind, because the question is, what I mean by I don't know about that is because there's only one, there's just Young-hee in the front, right? So, breaking a beam or, causing a stir in the air, these sorts of things you can measure easily. Or, if you have lasers, right, breaking a laser. But because of the geometry of the situation, I don't see how any of those could work with a single entity in the front, right? I can definitely see Doppler detections. I can definitely see unique identifications. How do you do like, oh, I blinked, or, I clenched my jaw, which I know it's not that sensitive.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty sensitive. It's pretty close to that, though.
Oh, it is? Okay,
Yeah,
well, in that
he's
case.
doing these close-up shots where, they like go a tiny bit and she's like,
right. Yeah, they go a tiny bit. That's right. That is true.
Yeah.
So maybe it could be just a visual image, right? If you take a camera image, so that's another thing in big data type analyses, is you take images and you break it into what are called features. So that's the exact same thing that it would do with your face. So if I have an image that's still, so every pixel uniquely can be mapped. And so if I have a camera on you and you move within that frame. But the thing about that is that would be very sensitive to environmental changes as well. Like someone next to you could move and put a shadow across you that would still create that image modification like that. So maybe that means there's a human back there somewhere. And so this system seems to be so well calibrated that those more subtle movements are the ones that I have a hard time trying to understand how to do it in a foolproof way in this circumstance.
Yeah, so it's sounding to me like you're veering towards our doll and her motion sensing capabilities, to the extent that we see in this episode, don't really fly.
I can't say it that way. I don't, it's one of these like so close to flying.
Well, here's
my ignorance is probably the reason I'd say it doesn't fly, right? It's my ignorance here.
Okay. And I love when we both admit that there are things that we don't know. Because again, that's part of the reason you and I have these conversations to open it
Yeah,
up to fans and to other folks in
yeah,
science,
yeah.
technology who may know. I guess my question would be too, like we sometimes talk about when we're talking about different conceits and gadgets and stuff, like, does the technology currently exist? Or do we think that it goes enough along with the rules of science and the universe that we think it could exist? Like there's nothing in here that is so egregiously like anti that we think that we potentially do you think this potentially could exist or might be out there just in something that you're not as aware of yet?
It's those slight motions that are the problem because they could be in any direction. So I guess, now that you put it that way, am I correct that Young-hee is the only source and system? And that's the other thing is that, even if you do detect them, the next step is how do you eliminate the person? And so their approach is to use snipers, right? And again, with a field full of people, how does the message go to Young-hee to a sniper? So is it the case that, there's, okay, sniper, you are the sniper for contestant number 3, and you're the sniper for contestant number 2, and you're the sniper, and these snipers are just so good that they never miss and they never hit the wrong person, right? And maybe the environment is so controlled that, they control all those variables. Even then, a bullet could pass through a person
Oh yeah, that's true.
and hit another person or bounce and hit another person. So there are these details that don't fly, but in gross, it totally flies. And so, I don't want to say it doesn't fly just because, I'm going to be honest, audience, Tamara and I, we record about 300 of these a day. And it was hard to keep track, and I just got off the road. I was in LA and New Orleans. I mentioned I went to New Orleans. Oh, I put on about 10 pounds.
Oh.
But there was a crisis in New Orleans. The recipes are changing. I don't know if that's normal evolution or it's a crisis, but the recipes are changing. Yeah, so I didn't study as hard as I could for this particular preparation. Is the point I'm getting at? And I usually go hard. I usually go deep to see if I can find every manifestation of what we're talking about. And this time around, the obviousness of how flyable it is on, of the specificity and movement in forwards and backwards. Yeah. But then to get it to the subtle details. And I'm like, but then how do you do that?
Maybe your answer is we're on an upward trajectory, but we haven't quite lifted off yet.
Or maybe it's not public yet.
It flies, but under the radar.
It flies under the radar. Yeah. I like that. It flies under the radar.
Well, it's really interesting hearing you talk about it, though, from the science perspective, because a lot of the stuff that you're mentioning, that give you pause to go, could this really work, are the same things that, for me, kind of bumped me story-wise.
So it flies, but under the radar? Well, we can't say that yet.
I don't know. Or maybe it flies in the script, but not quite on the screen. Like things that I'm thinking about, for example, are like one thing that comes up in the scene is, our sort of main character is given a hint by another player that like if you stand behind them, that the motion won't be detected. And like my brain goes, oh yeah, sure. Because if I were playing red light, green light, yeah, if I can hide behind someone, the person in the front isn't going to see me. But that also makes me think that like, again, as we mentioned, there's 456 people playing this game when it starts. That makes me think that none of the people in the back really ever would have gotten shot because there are always people in front of them. Yet we do see them get sniped. So that was a bump. And then the other big bump that I had was, so the motion set, it's presented, again, she's like this 14-foot tall doll. And here's a bizarre fun fact. This was not something that was actually created for the show.
Oh, it wasn't.
She existed previously, and they found her and they brought her to the set to be this thing, but she was not actually created for the show. And they did
They
a ton
saw
of
it. They were like, "That big creepy doll is perfect for this script."
yes,
Yeah,
yes, because
yeah.
she's big and she's creepy and she's got these big eyes and and then a key thing that we see over and over again as they're playing the game is, we see her eyes and we see sort of the motion sensor overlay. They do sort of like a graphic overlay so that you can see her lock onto things. But if you remember, when you were playing red light, green light as a kid, you would be turned around, people would be running up behind you. And then the whole thing was like, how quickly were you going to say it? How quickly were you going to turn around? So as our doll is turning, right? So she's looking behind her, she's turning around. There is a group of players who would not be able to be seen as much as she's making that turn.
Yeah,
So
the
there's
time
actually
gradient.
right. So there's one
Yeah.
side of the field that actually has an advantage. So like that stuck out to me. The same thing you were talking about with like the specificity, and there's so many people playing and it's a really big space. And I got to give a big shout out to the set designers and the production designers because, you get that sense of how big this space is and this created space that they've made for this game. So like, how is she monitoring that all, especially when it does seem to be more of like a linear tracking?
Right. She can't be the source, the beam source of every beam, right? I mean, that.
Right. So like I wondered about that. And then the other thing that you were talking about too, from the science perspective, also, again, like hit me, no pun intended, from a story. Yes, pun was totally intended. Sorry. From a story perspective. What? Wait, yeah.
For those of you who are listening and not watching, I'm wearing a shirt with the word nerds across the chest, and it's made out of the digits of pi, like at least 100 of them. But maybe
Oh,
200.
is it? See, I can't see that because my version of you is a little blurry right now because our signal's a little funky. So I can see that it says nerds, but I didn't know it was made of pie.
Yeah, it's made of pie. Nerds made of pie. But anyway, as Tamara was nerding out, I was pointing at the nerds across my chest. Anyway, back to
getting shot. So, you were saying
poking holes in
right. So you were, and again, like reminder, we do this as fans who love this kind of stuff. We're not doing this to like bring down the show, but as we all watch these things, we all have our different reactions. And so the thing that you were talking about the communication between the doll, between Young-hee motion, like locking on and going, oh, somebody's moved. They're not frozen. And then the amount of time that it takes to get to the signal for the snipe gun to them, that seemed really, really fast. And so it actually made me wonder if there weren't actual people behind the sniper guns, if it was, some kind of wired situation, because it just seems super fast.
So let me give you in terms of how fast computers are. Okay.
Yeah.
So a year ago, I attended the high performance computing conference it was in Denver, Colorado. And one of my guys I look up to, who's, an expert in the field, he says to me, yeah, man, our fastest computers now do 10 to the 18 calculations per second. And, to the average person, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm the average person. What is, give me a
Exactly. And I was like, whoa, how is that even possible? Right? And he says, well, the way I like to explain it to people is it does 1 billion calculations in 1 billionth of a second.
What? And we're not talking about a quantum computer here, right?
No, this is your regular old, cluster. And, so 10 to the 18, so 1 billion is 10 to the power 9. So, there's 10 to the power 9 times 10 to the power 9. So 1 billion in 1 billionth is, so that is fast.
That's fast. So if our snipers were not people and instead there was some kind of system where they had the doll wired up to some kind of automatic computerized sniping gun, then maybe that's like where my brain went.
But it would not be errorless. That is the key thing.
No, and that was the other thing. And again, like we're so in simpatico on this one because the other thing I was like, well, even if it's fast, let's talk about the accuracy, especially when at the beginning of the game when you have 456 people like running all over this field. So I got bumped a lot by this. Like, I love the idea of it, and I love the ingenuity of it, and the creepiness of it is just like off the charts with this big creepy doll and tapping
What
into this childhood game.
is
But
there a time limit to get to the other end of the field?
yeah, it's 5 minutes.
There is. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's
Because you
5 minutes.
can't just lie down and go an inch at a time and just lie still.
No, you got it's actually a race. Yeah. So you've got the time limit thing. So, like,
Yeah.
I don't know. From a story perspective, like, I give them big props for creepiness. I give them big props for using a game that we as viewers, because again, this is the first episode of the series. So they use a game that we as viewers, for the most part, I would say, if we're talking about our average viewer here, Korea, other places in the world, would understand what the game is. So what helps with that in the storytelling is we anticipate what's going to happen. Like, we know how this game goes. We already know the
All the
rules.
tension is there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's amazing. And they do that so masterfully.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
then when I really get into, okay, but how is this working? I kind of go, Now I suspend my disbelief because the show is really well structured and the lead actor is really good, and the set design in this world that they have created is fantastic. It was mostly practical sets.
So what I'm hearing is you would love to run in that field and play red light, green light with this creepy doll.
Dude, I don't know where you got that from. No, I would not. Although
That's not what you're saying?
no, but what is so something else that is interesting to me though is that right, there was Squid Game, and then they actually Netflix followed up Squid Game with Squid Game The Challenge,
Right.
which was a reality show. It was made in the UK, and it introduced challenges that we're seeing both in the series as well as other challenges too. And this was one of the ones that they needed to do. And they had to do some different things. So some of the things that they did to actually make this work, if you want to say
Right,
in real life, if you're considering a reality show real life, was that all of the players had trackers in their jackets. Now, we never see anything like that in this first episode of Squid Game. Maybe there is that kind of technology happening, to your point earlier about how to potentially get this to work. But when they did actually try and do this, they put trackers in the jackets. And no, just to be really clear, in case anybody has not seen the challenge version of this, the reality show version, they did not kill anybody. You were eliminated, but you actually had a squib that was custom fit into like a vest type of thing that you wore under your jacket. Because again, if people aren't familiar with Squid Game, all of the players wear these like teal colored jackets, like sort of tracksuits. So there was a custom thing that like vest type of thing that went under, or to me, it looked more like a sports bra because I'm a lady. It went under your jacket that had a squib in it. And if you were sensed that you had moved after the doll told you to stop, your squib went off, which is pretty crazy. So, so they had
exploded.
Yeah. So they had ways of doing this when they were trying to make it happen in sort of a more like real life situation.
Right. Without the doll detecting you and triggering a sniper. It was all self-contained on your body.
Yeah, exactly. And in addition, it wasn't the motion tracking system wasn't in the doll, it was behind her. So the doll was still there in the challenge to do the red light, green light, but the tracking system was behind, and it was a pretty sophisticated tracking system. Like, I'm assuming using some of the technology that you were talking about before.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah.
So I have to say, like, story-wise, when it comes to the doll as motion tracking / killing system, I don't quite think it flies.
Surprise, surprise.
But that does bring up something kind of as we get into our third question, which is always like does it fly for the vibes? Does it fly for the feels? You sort of brought up this idea of like this kind of competition. Would this work in reality? The setup for this is the idea of people who are in debt. The setup for the show is people who are in debt, and they're really desperate, and they come to this game not knowing what they're getting into, but just knowing they're sort of out of choices, and that this might present a financial remedy for them.
So, people getting this desperate, people come from all walks of life. And as a person who, crossed some economic, I lived in different geographical eras. I've lived in different socioeconomic levels. And one of the things that was often mentioned in people when I was in the lower socioeconomic levels is how you have some guy on Wall Street who's some gazillionaire. He loses money and he jumps off the building, right? And, the poor folks are like, nah, it ain't that serious. I wouldn't do that, right? So it says to me that, but again, it's in a different country. I don't know how people think or feel, but does this mean that you have to recruit only people who would take money that seriously? Because debtor's prison no longer exists. And, if it's like you're going to risk your life, that means that there needs to be life at risk in order to be that desperate for most of us, right? It's either you or someone close to you that you don't, that you want to save or something along those lines.
I mean, well, it's interesting, like thinking of back in the time of like Dickens and debtor's prison and we're going to throw you in, but like, what is the modern equivalent of that, right? Because debtor's prison may not exist, but if, I forget what the actual statistic is, but there's a specific statistic about how many Americans are just one paycheck away from not being able to pay their rent or their mortgage.
Oh, that's everybody. The number who ain't is negligible. So let me just interject here. That's one of the things that I realized. I was like, wait a minute, here I am. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. I've gotten a PhD. I've gone to work at one of the top technological companies in the Silicon Valley, making bigger salary than I ever thought I would ever make, though still under $100,000 when I started. But yet I'm still broke. So I realized I was living in the ghetto in Richmond, California in the Bay Area, right? Every house on my block had bars on the windows, and I'm just like, okay, you make more money, you're just broke on a different level. So,
everyone,
if you're born without a safety net, you kind of go into debt to pull yourself out. And so you're still broke even once you start earning money. And then, a decade later, finally.
Yeah. I mean, everyone's got their own sort of inner barometer of where their desperation point is. And if if one is, in that position and, you don't get that paycheck, and so suddenly you don't make rent or you don't make your house, and suddenly you're in a situation where you are unhoused, and then that has a whole like cascading effect on healthcare, on education, on mental health, on all of it. And so there may not be debtor's prison, but there are serious consequences, right? And
but
for
it's
some
life
people,
or that. And then the other thing I think about is, if you say, for example, I'm in debt because I need to pay for an operation for a loved one, say my child. If I enter this game to get this money and fail, they're in a worse position.
Yeah.
Right? They're in a catastrophically worse position. So, what are the motivations that, if the loss of you is worth, it's like, get this money or it's a wrap,
Well, I mean, that taps into some really classic tropes, right? Even some classic like movie tropes of, there's
bank robbers.
Well, no, not so much bank robbers. I was going in a different direction with movies where somebody kills themselves to get the insurance payment that will then take care of their family.
Right. That's true. So
you've got things like that. And then ostensibly our modern version of this is like, now we have all of these. I mean, what I feel like what Squid Game does so brilliantly is it's a satirization or a comment on all of these reality shows, right? where you go on and you do all of these crazy things, whether it's like you eat bugs on Survivor or,
Yeah.
you do like you do all kinds of,
What was that Joe Rogan show where they used to eat weird stuff?
oh God, I don't know. It was too gross for me to watch. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, but half of that stuff, I was like, dude, that would not be a problem for me. I'd eat that. Like,
Well, you eat all the crazy things anyway. I don't want to ask what weird animal you ate when you were in New Orleans on the trip you just mentioned.
Hey, listen, the other thing is I love everything like fermented and pungent, And so I was once on a show where they wanted to gross me out by eating a 1,000-year-old egg. And I'm like, oh, this is delicious.
Wait, how do you even know?
They're not actually that old. That's just what they're called.
Okay.
Yeah, they're just severely.
I was like, did they dig it up from a tomb or what?
Right, from the Egyptian, a pharaonic egg.
All right, so getting back to this question though, sort of this vibe question of this general idea of, do we feel like it's taking advantage of people to create these shows where you can go on, you can either by doing something gross or humiliating yourself or maybe crossing a romantic line, you have the opportunity to win a lot of money? Or is it like, no, you know what? This is an opportunity. And if somebody's willing to do this thing, then like that's their choice. It's a free country. We're just providing opportunity.
Yeah, that's the other side of it for me. Because again, I am a big about freedom. And if you choose to do this, I think like you should be able to choose to do this, even at the stakes that are in the game. I feel like if you want to make that choice for yourself as a sane adult, you should be allowed to do that. If for you, it's not. I'll give you an example. So here's a time when benevolence I found that, people see things differently. So I was taking a car back from a TV shoot in LA back to the airport. And I asked the lady who was driving, I was like, hey, have you had some stars, right? And she's like, oh yeah, she told me the story that her grandfather had been William Shatner's butler for many years.
Oh, wow.
Right? Yeah, it's a great story. And she told me that, based on their rules, you're not allowed to speak to the passenger unless they speak to you first. And so she wanted some way of, informing him and didn't want to take a chance that he wouldn't bring up a conversation. So she said she opened her cell phone and brought up a picture of her grandfather and put it on the back seat. And when he gets in, he goes, oh, here's somebody's cell phone. And she tells him, look at the photograph. She's like, oh, how do you know? And so, yeah. But the story took a negative turn because someone broke into Shatner's home when he wasn't there, and her grandfather lost his life in the robbery.
Oh, my God.
Right, yeah. So William Shatner was very touched at this moment. So he invites her in the house, and he gives her a tour of the house, show her where her grandfather stayed and what he meant to her. And that meant a lot to her.
Yeah.
Right? So when William Shatner flew up to space, and it was news, and I was on the news describing it, and they were talking about, what type of person Shatner is. I brought up this story, and, someone reached out, responded to the YouTube, but like, oh, rich man was nice to his butler. What a big guy. Oh, what a human, right? And I was like, anytime we're nice to each other, it's a good thing, right? He wasn't,
Yeah, I mean, I take issue with that. Like you're not lauding William Shatner right there because you're telling a story about somebody comforting somebody and going an extra step to like share a story with his granddaughter and share a moment. Like he could have just been in the car and said, oh, he was lovely and it's so nice to meet you and what a cool small world connection. But the fact that he went the extra step to say, let me show you where he was, like that is going the extra step. And you can do that whether you have a gazillion dollars or negative dollars. Like that's all in who you are and how you approach the world and how you approach
the point is, though, if you do it without a gazillion dollars and it comes across authentic and heartfelt, which is how she described how she experienced the experience, right? Then it's not. Then it's a genuine thing and it meant something. And so, for me, I was taking the emotion that she had shared with me to share with the world, right? To say, here's who the man is. But then when people look at this idea of the involvement of money, because there's this, hierarchy between the butler and the owner of the home, then suddenly now it dirties it for them. So what I'm saying is in the Squid Game now, if it's like for money, even though people have the choice and it means something to them, others are still, may still see it as exploitative and not want it to exist.
Well, see, my one thing there, though, is that with the Squid Game, like you were talking about freedom before, right? And that we should have the freedom to make these choices, to do these kinds of things.
Yeah.
But with Squid Game, they don't know what they're getting into. Like nobody says to them, nobody says to them, you will come play these games. It's just, they know there's some kind of game or situation and they know they can financially benefit from it, but nobody's saying, come play this game. And if you don't win, you lose your life. Like there's a little bit of a premonition with that because earlier in the first episode, what happens is he basically meets a recruiter for the game and they play this paper game where it's sort of this game where you throw pieces of folded up paper. And if you can get the one that's on the floor to turn over, each player has one of them to turn over, then you win. And in this case, if the recruiter's betting money and our main character is like, I don't have any money. And he's like, well, I'll slap you instead. So like, there's definitely a premonition there that there's going to be some violence and that this is not benevolent.
Right.
But that said, like, they don't know what they're getting into. So that's where I would.
On that note, for the vibes, Squid Game does not fly.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you on that. Full disclosure, I have tried to watch this series. Look, I'm gonna say from a creator standpoint, I give so much. I give so many accolades to the creator and to the team behind it because they created a full world and a full experience. And the set design is amazing. The way, not just like in this first episode with the red light, green light game, but with all of the games that they play throughout, with the way that they've created sort of this whole bunk bed dormitory set where you've got these massive bunk beds that are stacked up on top of each other in this very cavernous setting. There's a whole like MC Escher section of the set, this facility where they're being kept with, if you're not familiar with MC Escher, it's he's most famous for the drawing where it looks like stairways that are going up and down, but they make no logical sense because they don't really connect with each other.
You said MC Escher. I thought you were talking about a rapper. But go ahead.
Different. It's kind of amazing nobody's taken on an MC Escher name as a rapper.
Right.
That's someone should do that. But there's a set that's like done in pinks and vibrant yellows that builds on that is very much in contrast with what's actually happening as people are being killed throughout the show. So the way that they have created this dystopian world, I think is really convincing and really effective. And it is not surprising to me that it was an incredible hit for Netflix and that there is another season coming. There's actually 2 more seasons coming out.
For me, when I first started watching the Squid Games, it was the shock value of it for me, right? I was brought in because of the popularity. When I started watching, I was like, holy cow.
Yeah, I have to be honest. While I admire the craftsmanship of the show, I actually couldn't watch the whole thing because for me, the desperation piece that we were talking about earlier, the emotional place that it lived at the time, it wasn't a place that I liked visiting for too long. That was a really hard emotional place for me to be in it, especially
away from horror.
I'm not a horror fan, but I like smart horror. I mean, I've grown to appreciate smart horror, I should say. I don't like it, but I appreciate it. And again, that's why I appreciate what the creators of the show have done.
I will again recommend to you the smartest, most brilliant horror ever. It's called Army of Darkness, but proceed.
I'll add to my list of things that I will watch.
There are listeners that are chuckling at this very moment.
With the windows very, very wide open and lots of sunlight streaming in the house. Oh my God, my husband actually last night, he was listening. He came home, he had listened to our Smile episode and he looked at me in the kitchen and he was like, wait, so you actually watched that? And I was like, of course I watched it. I watch everything that we, talk about on our show. And he was like, how did you watch that? You're terrified of horror movies. And I was like, in the middle of the day with all the window shades open and a lot of lights on.
Yeah.
All right, but to bring it back around to this,
right.
yeah, Squid Game, for me, for the vibes, for the place that it lives, this is not a dystopia, not a situation I would want in the world. So it does not fly for me. And I say that, again, with love and admiration for the creators. What you've done is so effective that it's not a world I can visit.
But the humans, I look at it like this. We humans have evolved past that type of entertainment.
I don't know.
Now it's boxing and football, right? Faux violence.
There's boxing, there's football, there's wrestling, like
right,
that's a whole
octagon.
Right.
Yeah, but straight up snipers, no. We can't have sniper games as a part of our entertainment. It's just not
as a part of reality, for sure.
Not as a part of reality.
No, definitely not as a part of reality.
Yeah. But we do allow wingsuit flying when they jump off the cliff in a wingsuit, and that is, you might as well have a sniper. Your days are numbered. You're on borrowed time every second you're in the air.
I feel like you just put an engineering challenge out there.
Maybe that's the challenge. All right, everybody jump out this plane in your wingsuit. If you land, you're still in the game.
Oh my God. All right. I just have to say, for our liability, please do not do this at home. Do not do this without, any sort of expert. And if you do want to know more about all of these technologies that we have been talking about, definitely check out doesitflypod.com, where our producers do an incredible job of putting links and things to the different technologies that Hakeem was talking about and to some of the behind the scenes stuff that I talk about. Find us on social media at Does It Fly Pod. We are on TikTok, right? And we are on...
Yeah, and when you visit the website, you may or may not discover the stand-up acts that Tamara and I do. You may or may not discover each of our calendar, how do I say this? We're flexing. Is what I'm saying.
My God, you were making up nonsense.
I said may or may not. I'm just... These are teasers to get them in there. What do people want?
What do the people want? Let us know in the comments.
Get a huge deposit in your bank account.
Turning it into a game.
Doesitflypod.com.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. We have new episodes every Friday, and we will see you next time.
See you next time.